Well, as we've been thinking about the theme of suffering, I heard the account of a woman who lost her husband and 3 daughters. All daughters were in their 20s when they died, within a very short space of time. And when those kind of things happen in life, I mean, there's maybe a slightly more extreme end in that. We wonder, how can you cope with that kind of suffering? I might feel, there's points in life where it feels like life is going along well. We feel, blessed and a wonderful situation, and then things happen that take us down into a pit of suffering. And there are, if you believe in a God, there are natural questions to ask about that, of what is God doing in those kind of situations. And as we come to the book of Job, we see here Job in the pit of suffering. We did the overview. It starts off as a wonderful situation. It then all takes him down into a pit of suffering. And in that pit, it can feel like we're never going to get out of it. So what kind of despair kicks in. We feel like we can never get out of it. But we get to the end of the book of Job, and we see there is life beyond the pit of suffering. 42 verse 10. The Lord makes him prosperous again. And in fact, if you remember the figures from chapter 1 to chapter 42, they're double the amounts in terms of animals that he ends up with. And so you end up, beginning of the book, it's a wonderful situation. Job is taken into the pit of suffering. At the end, you have a wonderful situation again. Now that doesn't mean that everything that's gone before is as if it no longer exists. Yeah, he's got 10 more children, but the ones he had before have died, and his family, verse 11, still come to comfort and console him over that. Nevertheless, there is this strong picture of blessing restored at the end of the book. How has Job got out of the pit? Well, he's not done it himself. Chapter 42, verse 10. The Lord restored his fortunes and gave him twice as much as he had before. We've seen throughout the book, haven't we, that the Lord is the one, God is the one in control. He allows the suffering that comes on him. Yes, Satan is the agent of that suffering, but God allows it. He's in control, and he is the one who brings blessing at the end. Now, we may think, if we're in a particular pit of suffering at the moment, well, good for Job. He ends up out of the pit. But what about my pit? It's said that time can be a great healer, and time does take the rawness and intensity of suffering. So it's not intense all of the time, but it doesn't deal with it in that way, does it? See, it's not like it all the time. As we said, there are times in life where we might feel, it's wonderful, we've got health, good relationships to enjoy, and it doesn't feel like a pit. And the good things of this world can be enjoyed. But as we look forward, we kind of know a pit's coming, don't we? With Helen on holiday, I was opening up for the painting group on Wednesday, and I met one of them as they were coming in, who was quite old, health struggling, talking to her, and she's saying, look, old age is not that much fun. And as we know, as you get older, don't you, health doesn't improve in that sense. It doesn't go in an upward trajectory. We only have to cast our minds forward in that sense. And it can happen before then, can't it? See, what hope is there? Now, here's what I want to be clear. Our hope, our ultimate hope, is not in this world. Sometimes I think there can be Christians saying a theology that is a theology like the three friends, that is half-truth, where there's, so God's a healing God. He wants what's best for you, so he'll heal you now. And there's the promise of that if you take hold of that in faith. I think you've only got to look at the book of Job to see that that's not true. And here's Job suffering immensely for a period of time. And whilst God can act in the situation now, he can do that. That's not what he's promised to do, and not where our ultimate hope lies. Because even if he changes our current circumstances now, they don't always stay like that, do they? But there is a hope that he's promised, a certain hope where it won't change, and that is in the life to come. We're talking about a new creation. Now, sometimes when we think about that, that can just feel like, okay, That feels very abstract and distant, as if it's not really much hope, because I just can't get my head around it. I think I've shared this illustration before. It was a cartoon illustration of someone there, sat on a cloud with their harp, and the capture, the kind of thought bubble is, I wish I brought a magazine. I think it's quite an old cartoon, because I guess if you were to update it, I wish I brought my iPhone, would be the up-to-date version of that one. As if when we get there, it's just going to be really boring, because we're sat on our clouds with our harps that hopefully we might be able to play. But we live in a physical world now, and there are good things, aren't there? The new creation to come will be a physical world where there'll be those good things and better. But there are times where we suffer and it feels like life is, in the pit of suffering. But God's promise is of a future world where there won't be that suffering. And so in some sense, the way to just try and think about it and get our heads around it is think of the good things in our world and go that there will be those, but ramped up. Most importantly, ramped up in that we will be with God. That will be the most important kind of ramping up of that new creation, with that relationship with him, with the good things of living in a physical world to enjoy without the suffering and the things that make this life hard. So it'll be a new physical world, that life beyond the pit of suffering. One to look forward to. And Job, in the book of Job, it's a mini picture of that whole Bible story. In Job, it starts off a wonderful situation. He goes into the pit of suffering, and at the end of the book, he's out, and it's a wonderful situation again. That's the Bible story, isn't it? Starts off in Genesis, a wonderful situation that they had turn and rebel against God, sin and suffering come into the world, and to a greater or less extent, you end up in that pit of suffering. But there is the hope coming that will be out of that, as Revelation pictures it, of a new creation where we will be with God and there will be no more mourning, crying, or pain. The question is how do we get there? How do we get out of that pit? Well, in Job's case, as we look at the book of Job, he gets out because God shows up in the end and he brings justice. And Job he's declared to be innocent. He's given his plaque of innocence that he desired, and God makes him prosperous again. So for us this morning, if we've lived perfectly, well, we know that God is just, and he will bring justice in the end and bring us out of that pit. Is that good hope for us this morning? We've seen in the series, isn't it, that actually we aren't innocent. We can kid ourselves sometimes that we are. We set the bar really low, but even as we did in the middle series in the section, love God and love our neighbor, of how we're not able to do that. We don't do that. So what hope is there for us then if we are not innocent to receive that hope? Well, again, the end of the book of Job points us to that hope. The three friends, chapter 42, verse 7, God is angry with them for how they have got it wrong. Do they end up being punished for that? No. Why not? It's not because they're able to rescue themselves. Look at verse 8 with me. A sacrifice is made, and Job prays for the friends, and they are spared the punishment that's their due. And so verse 9, God accepts Job's prayer. Job acts, as we might call it, as a mediator, a go-between, between God and the three friends. Now, this is a picture of the Bible story. So how do the three friends avoid punishment? There's the element of sacrifice and Job acting, praying for them as a mediator, as a go-between. And in that, he points us to the true fulfillment of the mediator that we need. The one who is the sacrifice that we need, that is Jesus, who came down and was that sacrifice for us on the cross. That the punishment we deserve as we trust in him is taken on the cross. And he's the one who's our mediator. He prays for us, who at this very point in time is at the right hand of his Father, praying for us. And so at the end of the book, Job here is a picture of what Jesus does for us to rescue us when we do not deserve it. At the end of the book, the picture with the three friends points us to the hope, that our hope is not in ourselves, but in Jesus, as Job points us to Jesus. Now that's unbelievably gracious of God. Just think about it for a moment, Put yourself in Job's circumstances. So his friends have come along. They basically slandered his name. They've left him feeling completely isolated. They've made his suffering more difficult when it's been acutely painful. And actually, at the end of the book, you put yourself in Job's situation where God said, I'm angry with the three friends. Tempted to think, yeah, good. They've made my life harder. So we don't see Job kind of putting the boot in on them, rejoicing in that. He is the one who is used for their pardon and their rescue. And God is so gracious to us like that. We've lived as his enemies. We've shaken our fist in his face. And even while we're doing that, Jesus has come down from heaven to earth to die to rescue us so that everyone who calls on the name of the Lord can be saved. Everyone. I think at the end of the book, I don't know whether you picked it up as you read through, verse 15, you've got that he has 7 sons, 3 daughters. The 3 daughters are named, and it talks about them being included in the inheritance. I think that's particularly mentioned because that probably wasn't the convention of the day in a patriarchal society. Yeah, it's including this picture of blessing coming at the end, and everyone's included. Even those who you might naturally think might not be, everyone is included. So in the pit of suffering, what are we going to do? How are we going to get out of life, the pit of suffering in this world? Well, we're not going to be able to climb out ourselves. We're just not able to do that. And it will end up worse. For if we don't have our wrongdoing forgiven, we'll have punishment for that coming. It will end up worse. But we are pointed to the hope that doesn't have to be the outcome for us. As we call on Jesus, he will, whoever we are, graciously receive us and forgive us and give us that future hope of being with God where we receive his righteousness to be made right for that. And so the hope this morning is in looking forward to what is coming. Life beyond the pit of suffering is coming through Jesus. That helps us in our current trials, doesn't it? So you see, what is coming is glorious, and therefore it helps us to know that our current pain is only for a time. It's encouragement for us to fix our eyes on what is coming. Read in a book recently, actually, it's the one that I think it was last week, Nathan did a book plug for a number of books called A Time to Mourn. We read it as a staff team. And Jonathan Edwards used to pray a prayer. If you don't know who he is, don't worry about what he prayed, which was this. He used to pray, stamp eternity on my eyeballs. That's what he used to pray. Isn't that a great prayer to pray? I tried to pray that a little bit more for myself, having heard that in our current circumstances, we can get so caught up in what is here and now as if we will never get out of the pit. Pray, stamp eternity on my eyeballs. As we trust in Jesus, we look forward to what is coming. The circumstances of now will not be like that forever. And that's our hope as we look to Jesus. See, life beyond the pit of suffering. But as we're in the pit now, we might wonder, well, why doesn't God get us out now, sooner, or at least take the edge off it? Well, one of the reasons he doesn't, and when we particularly looked at that in the big questions on suffering that's on our YouTube channel, is one of the reasons he doesn't is without Jesus, it's not going to be a better hope for us. It's going to be a worse hope. And so one of the reasons he delays coming and righting all those wrongs and lifting us out is so that if we're not trusting in him, we have time to turn and know that hope. I ask the question, my suffering's really hard going, but that might be to wake us up to this world is, it's not the final end of how things should be. We go, well, why doesn't he take the edge off my suffering now? The truth is he does. As we've wronged him, we deserve worse than we have now. He is already taking the edge off our suffering. But as we turn to Jesus and we trust in him, our punishment is dealt with. And so there's no condemnation to those who are in Christ. We have that forgiveness. Why does God still make us go through deep and painful suffering? Well, we don't get all the specific answers. We've been saying through this series, we're called to trust God with the things we cannot understand. But we do see in Job 42 what God does in Job through the pit of suffering. And as he does things in Job through the pit of suffering, we can be reassured that as we are going through it, it is purposeful. God is doing something in that, and that is helpful and reassuring for us, as well as being reassured it's not going to be like that forever. There's a future glory that is coming. So let's look at the things we see. So humility and trust in verses 1 to 6 of chapter 42. So verse 2, Job says, I know that you can do, he's talking about God, I know that you can do all things. No purpose of yours can be thwarted. Job has a greater confidence that God can do what he says he will do. And then he says, verse 3, surely I spoke of things I did not understand. And Job has learned a humility here, a greater realization. And I guess there's, in his suffering, he's been grappling, going, look, I'm innocent. And I'm not sure about God in that. Where's his justice? He kind of knows God is just, but there's been a grappling around that, and he's almost dragged God down slightly. And what happens at the end is his conclusion is, God, I know you're great. No purpose of yours can be thwarted. I know there are things that I don't understand. And he gets a greater realization of who he is and who God is, so that he has humility in himself and great trust in God and what he can do. Now we do get verse 6, don't we, where Job repents. This is not a repenting like the friends have called him to, because saying like, you sinned, therefore you suffered. He says, no, he suffered innocently, but it is a repenting along the lines of questioning God's justice, almost pulling God down slightly, rather than realizing and recognizing who God is. He's repenting of that. And this area where it can help us of learning humility and trust, that can be just helpful to us in life. So often in our, there's lots of books out there that kind of self-help, believe in yourself. Our culture puts that forward of having confidence in ourselves. That doesn't always work, does it? So just pardon a kind of slightly lighter made-up illustration of, just imagine, for example, you're in a situation, and I don't know where these come from. I've ended up watching fail army videos on YouTube, so you see where stuff goes wrong, and something goes wrong, and you get trapped. That's and you can't get out, but you believe in yourself. Someone's come along. Do you need some help with that? No, I've got this, but you haven't. You're stuck. See, what a right view of the situation, with right humility in your own circumstances, is I can't get out of this situation. Therefore, we cry out, help. And hopefully some people will be able to come and together be able to help us out of the situation. See, humility leads to dependence in the one who can help us. That is our great God who we can trust in. And through the pit of suffering, Job learns that to a greater extent than he already had. And maybe that's one of the things that God will teach us in the walks through life, of some of the difficulties he brings on us that are good lessons to learn, that if life went well all the time, we might not be able to learn in that way. Second thing then, confidence through perseverance in the pit. Let me quote elsewhere in the Bible, the book of James, which we'll actually be looking at after Easter. James 5 verse 11 quotes Job, where it says this, as you know, we consider blessed those who have persevered. You have heard of Job's perseverance and have seen what the Lord finally brought about. The Lord is full of compassion and mercy. So say, as Job perseveres, it leads to blessing in the end. Now, as we think about this, as Job keeps going, it's not perseverance in anything. It is perseverance in trusting God, for us trusting in Jesus and in his rescue. The point is, there is great hope in the end as we do that. If you remember back in Job chapter 1, one of Satan's accusations was Job only looks like he's a follower because life has gone so well for him. If you remove that blessing, he will show his true colors. Maybe for us, if we go through life and it all goes well, and we think, actually, how confident, what assurance do we have that we have a genuine trust? Because Satan's test whilst it is a vindictive one against Job, it is a fair one in terms of the measures that he puts there. not the measures, but it's a fair one in terms of you could actually just be in it for what you get in following God. How can we reassure our faith is genuine? Well, listen to these words from the New Testament in 1 Peter 1, 6-7. It's spoken about the inheritance that we have through the resurrection of Jesus Christ that cannot perish, spoil, or fade. And verses 6 and 7 say this: "In this you greatly rejoice, though now for a little while you may have had to suffer grief in all kinds of trials." Speaking of, you may have had to suffer. "These have come," verse 7, "so that your faith of greater worth than gold, which perishes even though refined by fire, may be proved genuine and may result in praise, glory, and honor when Jesus Christ is revealed." So he's talking about an inheritance to come, trials come. What do? They prove your faith genuine. That as you keep going, you keep trusting in Jesus, you have assurance that I've got a genuine faith. And if I've got a genuine faith, I have confidence in what is coming in the future. That in the current pit of suffering, I have a greater hope. We'll be out of the pit and can look forward to that. And therefore, God, again, is doing something in our trials, our difficulties. He's reassuring us in our faith that we have certainty of what is coming through Jesus. Thirdly, then, of what God does in Job through suffering is he knows God better. 42, verse 5. "My ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you." That's maybe the kind of, a little bit like, when, I don't know if you've had some written contact, email contact between someone, maybe even a bit more than that, conversation on the phone, and then you meet someone for the first time, and you've had interaction with them. You're like, "Oh, so nice to meet you in person, face to face." It's that fuller experience that's going on there. Job has heard about God. He's questioned what he's like. He's got the answer. He now knows God better as God has shown up and spoken. And through the pit of suffering, it has brought a greater intimacy with God. One thing I often use different things at different points. One thing I often use is in the 23rd Psalm with people as they're going through difficulty. It's just highlighting what happens. The Lord's my shepherd. He makes me lie down in green pastures. It's like him over there. He leads me beside quiet waters. He. It goes through it's like him over there. And then the psalm moves into the dark times. "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for no longer he, but you. You are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me," because walking through the darkest valley has brought a greater intimacy. God is doing something in our suffering. It is purposeful. That pit that we go through fosters a greater intimacy with God, and we know our great God better. We know Jesus as the Lord, the Good Shepherd of the 23rd Psalm, who will lead us through that darkest valley to the great glorious hope to come. And so we know God better now in this life, and we know that there'll be a fuller revelation to come when we will see him in that new creation. And so as we think about living life in the pit now, there are lessons in that God will teach us. And we're encouraged through what he teaches Job: humility and trust, confidence through perseverance, and knowing him better. And the fact that our suffering is not meaningless should help us as we go through it. There is some truth in the expression, isn't there? No pain, no gain. Isn't it worth some pain to know God better with greater intimacy? No, we don't make light of the great sufferings we might go through. We might not be able to see it at the time. We might not be able to see it for quite a long time afterwards. But through suffering, as we trust in Jesus, God is shaping us for our good. It doesn't mean we won't still have questions. We'll still have questions, but because God is in control and he's kind and just, and we look at Jesus, the one who's sent to rescue us, who died for us, we're encouraged we can trust him with the things we cannot understand. As we come to the end of our look at the book of Job, I'm really thankful God has given us this book. I hope you are as well. You know, I hope we're encouraged to, we've got a God who is a kind God. We can cry out to him. In our cries, he can read between the lines, that he's ready to welcome someone searching after him in the agony of suffering, asking our questions, living in the tension with that where we go, well, God, what are you doing? Meanwhile, knowing we can only go to him for hope. And as we get to the end of the book, we might feel like Job is exceptional, isn't he? Job is exceptional. I'll say yes and no. Because there are points in which he's exceptional as he points us to Jesus, the one who is exceptional. And yet the path he walks is not an exceptional path. Well, Jesus says, if we follow him to take up our cross and follow him, it is a path of suffering to glory. It's not an exceptional path. The woman I mentioned at the start, who lost a husband and 3 daughters, all within a short period of time, her son-in-law, who told this story, he'd lost his wife, speaking to his mother-in-law, he said to her, look, you're a remarkable Christian woman. To which she said, I'm not a remarkable Christian woman. I'm an ordinary Christian woman. He asked her, how did you cope? I believed God was in control. And as Christians, we're called to follow the path of Christ. That is a pit of suffering in this life, to take up our cross and follow him. That should be our expectations for this life. The Bible lays that out very clearly. Yes, there'll be plenty of times of blessing and good things, but that is the reality. But as we follow the path of Jesus, who went that path to the cross of suffering, we don't experience anything like as extreme as he did. We follow the path. As he is raised to the glorious new creation, we will surely follow that path. And that is our certain hope for the future that helps us in the present. And as we wait, we entrust ourselves to our great God, who is kind and just, who rules supreme, and therefore we can trust him with the things we cannot understand. Now I'm going to pause at this point. I think we're going to move into the question and response time. Let me lead us in a prayer of response, and then we'll look at some of those together. Father in heaven, we want to thank you so much that you're on your throne, ruling well for our good. We thank you for the great hope that we have in Jesus. Pray for any here that do not know that hope. They've come to put their hope in Jesus. And then as we do, as we trust in him, that would give us great hope in the now, that you are doing purposeful and good things for us in that. May we know that with confidence, and then we pray you to help us to look forwards with joy to what is coming because of what Jesus has won for us. And we pray we help one another and spur one another on with these things. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, do go, and I hope this will be helpful and not take away from what we've been looking at. But do go to the Slido. This is where Andrew's going to look at what questions we've got. As I say, if there aren't any, No, there will be some. There are some. Okay. Right. Ed, your response then, not your answer, your response to the first question. What would be the one main thing you'd love us to remember from the book of Job for years to come? The one main thing. Great. I looked at this morning as to whether there had been any questions as to who read their notices, and thought that's a great first question, and then I thanked Nathan when I saw him for planting that as a really good first question in there, so thank you for that. The one main thing, so that's the only question I've actually read to this point. I'll read a few more. Do you know, it is the thing I've kind of probably repeated again, you can trust God with the things you cannot understand. As you go through difficulty, you can trust God with the things you cannot understand. Now, that is all loaded on who God is. As we know our great God as to who he is, because we know who he is, we can trust him with the things we cannot understand, because ultimately he'll lead us through now and lead us to eternity.
Thank you very much. Secondly, then, if God's plans cannot be thwarted, should we pray for our circumstances or those of others to change?
Great question.
Thank you.
We were grappling with this a little bit in our training track on Tuesday nights. I don't think I made a great go at answering it then. So in terms of, and the answer is yes. We should pray for circumstances to change because we're not at that final, the way we live now, there are things in this world that are not as they should be. They're not outside God's control. They're completely within his control. But there are things that are, wrong in this world. And so we pray for them to change. And God gets us, we're allowed to be involved in his purposes in praying in that. What we are reassured of, it's not all on us and our prayers. We get on board with God who's going to work out his purposes any which way, but we get the joy of being involved in that. So, yes.
Just to say, by the way, it's probably not worth adding any more questions apart from ticks because we won't get through them all. And I'm petrified not keeping up.
Well, can I say, you can add more. We just won't get through them all. And actually, I might go away, look at them.
That wasn't a question. You don't have to respond to my one on that one.
Oh, it's fine.
Okay,
I'm just contradicting you to say, add more questions. We won't deal with them all now. But it is helpful, and I might, if there's some I might actually maybe respond to and put them in the church notes or something.
I think Daniel Cook grasped the moment where people are at. My friends blame God for their suffering. I explained temptation and free will. But how does this hold up when God has the final say in allowing their suffering?
Let me just get my head around the question. There are two aspects to it, aren't there? So there is, God is in control. He allows the suffering. I live in this world as a human being who makes choices, and I'm responsible for my choices in that. Now, that the type of free will, again, we were grappling with this a little bit on those of you on Tuesday night on the whole, we don't have a free will that's outside of God's control, but we are held as responsible human beings in that. And so what God's sovereignty is, you read through the Bible, you're trying to hold these things together, it never allows us to do is to go, I don't have any responsibility for the way I live and the choices that I make. And so we can't deny that. I think that's, my friends blame God for their suffering. We want to say, yes, God is in control of that. But some of the stuff we were saying this morning is, God is bringing good through, as we trust in him, he'll bring good in that and lead us through that to a better position, the new creation, if we trust in him. If we don't trust in him, why would we expect any better in that? Actually, we've rebelled against him. We actually just deserve his punishment.
I think this next question, I think is a great one, because I think understanding God's blessing, many of us get it a bit muddled. But as Christians, are we blessed both when we have material possessions and when we are in the pit, as you said? In fact, what does it mean to be blessed?
Yeah, okay. Multiple questions in there. So are we blessed when we have material possessions and when we're in the pit? I want to say yes. And some of that is we might not always appreciate that, but it is at different times in life, God does different things to us in, when things are going good, maybe when things are going badly, and he'll teach us through that. And that is part of trusting the overall, God is in control, working out purposes for our good. And sometimes he might remove things. We don't get why, and it feels much harder, but ultimately he'll lead us through that. And so what does it mean to be blessed? It doesn't mean, I guess if you had a worldly definition of that, of, health, wealth, prosperity, it doesn't mean that. It means that we are well off because God has made us that way. What does that look like? Well, actually, we might need different things at different points in our life. But trusting that God has done it.
Next then, if the pit still feels unbearable, even after being reminded of God's promise, is it a symptom of not yet grasping the lessons of our suffering, or is there more? And then I think that's kind of linked to the one below that. If we have a good life and we're grateful for everything, is there something we can do to ensure we trust in God when things don't go well in the future? Do you mind if I answer a bit of that? And then you can...
I don't mind at all. No, you go for it.
We did a series when I was a student on the book of Ruth, and Ruth goes off to Moab, comes back. She's lost both her sons and her husband, and she shakes her fist at God. She shakes her fist at God, and she says, "Don't call me Naomi, call me Mara, for the Lord's made my life very bitter." And the guy preaching said she didn't understand her suffering, but she had a framework of faith that she could throw her suffering in. She knew who she could go to when she was suffering. She knew who she could shake her fist at, and that kind of helps. But then also within the suffering, as far as we're finding it unbearable, is that a symptom of something else? It could be. It could be that as a church, we might be letting you down. And there's a responsibility on us as a church fellowship to look out for each other. So when we're having coffee, to ask, "How are you doing?" And you don't have to have the answer. You can be clumsy in the way that you support people. One particular thing that helped me, many of you know, my brother and I was reminded of this just on Friday as it happens. Okay, we were in a climbing accident, he died. A friend rang me up, and she was on the phone, stumbling through whatever she was saying, and then she just burst into tears on the phone. She had no words to say, but through her, God said, "I am weeping with you." She was God's voice. She was God's emotion telling me, "I'm with you in the situation." And then the framework of faith, what I knew of God, I could trust him for my circumstances. So I didn't understand my circumstances. I don't know why he was allowed to die. I mean, he was the following week on the Tuesday, he was picking up his theology degree. He and his wife were about to go off to Brazil as missionaries. What's the point of getting rid of a first-class Christian who was going off to do the tough stuff? I don't understand that. But what I do know of you, Lord, that's the framework of faith that I throw my suffering. And that phone call did more to me. And by the way, as well as the many cards that were sent to us, to Sandy and I, the fellowship getting around us did not let us down. They were God's voice to us. So there is a responsibility to us in suffering to look out for each other. There is a huge responsibility to us when we're having coffee together to ask after each other, to pray with and for each other.
Okay. Thanks for sharing that, Andrew. I'd probably say on the one of if the pit still feels unbearable, even after being reminded of God's promise, is it a symptom of not grasping lessons? Not necessarily. Actually, things can just be so acutely difficult at a point of time. You're just like, this is unbearable. That is a kind of natural response of, I'm longing for a new creation where there won't be that suffering. So as we've seen with Job, it's not that he isn't a genuine follower. He's just suffering in that. And so there may be lessons to learn in that, but it's not necessarily a symptom that you just haven't got things. And so our ministry to one another, if someone is feeling like that, is not, well, you've just got more to learn. That's not what we're saying in that circumstance. It might just be it's just so acute at a point in time. And on the other, if you had a good life and are grateful for everything, is there something we can do to ensure we trust in God? And I think also we said God brings testing to reveal that in us, but actually as it's almost is our attitude one of, what's our attitude towards, say, the things that we have? Do we have them with a kind of tight fist or an open hand? Some of it is just trying to cultivate our attitude towards the things of this life, that if they were taken away, we trust God in that, and in our prayers, in praying that and so on.
All the trouble the Lord had brought on him, difficult. The gospel is one of suffering. So did God bring on him, on Job, the suffering of the cross in a way? Yes.
Let me get my head around that question, sorry.
Well, while you're doing that, just with regard to the fourth friend, Elihu, he's a bit of a Melchizedek. We just don't know. He just disappears from the narrative. There is no more mention of him.
I think I understand the question. Is just saying, actually, the gospel is one, and I said this in the sermon, didn't I? Is suffering to glory. So did God bring on him that pattern in Job? Yes, I think so. It's the overall Bible pattern of from beginning to end. So he goes the way of following Christ, which is in suffering to glory.
And then lastly, we can see kind of what changed in Job's attitude, but what do you think changed his attitude to God? What do you think triggered it in him, I think is what the question's asking.
Well, I mean, ultimately, it's 38 to 41, isn't it? God shows up and speaks, and he just, that's a life-changing experience for him in that. But he's been grasping throughout the whole process of, going through, and I said, the end of chapter 28, he knows the answer is actually to fear God and shun evil. And so he's been going along the whole process of living through the suffering. He already knew things at the start, living for God and going through the suffering, and then God showing up. The whole process is what is doing that changing, transforming work in him.
Ed, thank you. I'll let you put your feet up for a few minutes and let the musicians come up here. But just
can I just say on that, I'm pretty sure we haven't. If you want to come and chat, to me, others, and so on, about this, very happy to in that and grappling with some of them more. But thank you.
Yeah.